Hello, I'm Paul Stainton and welcome to another lockdown interview. We're talking to those at the sharp end of the fight against coronavirus in the city of Peterborough. We've already spoken to Gillian Beasley and Caroline Walker, who runs the Peterborough City Hospital. Today we speak to MP for Peterborough, Paul Bristow. Paul, hello.
Hi Paul, how are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. Now, I suppose, like everyone else, life for you as MP for Peterborough is very different too. What is your daily routine like? You're not going to the House of Commons every day, I take it?
I'm not, no. So I'm doing most of my work from right here in Peterborough, either on the phone or doing it virtually, like I'm doing it with you right now. I'm speaking to you, and they've created a new system in Parliament where you're able to ask questions, you're able to participate in debates, you're able to do all those sorts of things virtually. But like with everything, it's not as good as being there in the real thing. And I think essential work is holding the government to account. So I think the Parliament will be going back, I think, after the recess next week. And so we should be back like schools are going back in June.
Yeah. You talk about schools going back, you talk about Parliament going back. What's changed? Why is it safe for schools to go back? Why is it safe for children and teachers to go back? Why are you so vociferous that they do go back when many are still worried?
Yeah, I mean, that's an excellent question, Paul. Look, I know and understand why so many parents and so many teachers are worried. It's big step going back to normality, step by step, and it's a lot we've asked people to do, staying at home, socially distanced, and all the rest of it, and it's a lot to ask people to go back. But let's just remember why we wanted schools to close. Schools were closed not because they were unsafe, it's because we were trying to reduce the level of infection spread. At that time, the R rate, which is the reproduction rate, if you like, was well over 3. Because everyone's done the right thing, because people have stayed at home, because people have gone that extra effort, that R rate is now well below 1. And now it's well below 1. It means the virus is diminishing in number, and the levels of infection are now much, much smaller than they were before. So because that's the case, we want children to start to go back to schools for a little bit of normality. Professor Chris Whitty always said schools aren't a dangerous place. And teachers have been in schools during this lockdown looking after the children of key workers, and there's been no significant risk to those teachers while they're teaching lockdown kids of key workers. So that's why we want children to go back to work. And it's also really important as well that disadvantaged children are the ones who are going to, I think, suffer the most by not being at school. They don't have access to computers, to resources for learning. And we can't allow that attainment gap, which has narrowed in recent years, but we can't allow that attainment gap between disadvantaged children to grow any bigger.
In general terms, has the government got it right? Because there's been criticism on lots and lots of fronts about how and when the government has given advice, particularly other care homes, and people have died in Peterborough care homes, possibly because of a lack of testing early on in April. So the government have made mistakes here, haven't they?
Well, I don't think the governor got everything right. My job, although I'm a Conservative MP and of course I support the government, I also sit on the Health and Social Care Select Committee, and it's a job I take very importantly indeed, especially during this time. It's my job to scrutinise policy. I think, if I'm being honest, what happened was the whole country decided to, the reason lockdown went in place was to stop the NHS being overwhelmed. And do you know something, in the main, that's been a real success. The NHS has coped admirably. But because of that real kind of key focus on wanting the NHS not to be overwhelmed, sometimes perhaps we've not been thinking about the social care system in quite the same way as our NHS. And one kind of true lesson, I think, that comes from me from this crisis is that we can't let the social care system and our NHS be separate. We have to combine them. A lot have been talked about them working together and being part of one system. That absolutely has to happen now, because we neglect social care at our peril, as you know, there's been, as we've seen through this crisis. Because one thing that I hope does come from this crisis, that we talk so compassionately and so positively about our NHS doctors, nurses, allied health professionals. But what about those people in social care? They need parity of esteem, and I hope from this difficult time we can do that.
Because we really didn't follow the science when it comes to care homes, did we? We just let people leave hospital without a negative test, and we put people in care homes who could have been COVID-19 already. So that was just a lack of kit, wasn't it?
I think sometimes in care homes, we talked about some of the guidance that went around. It's all about kind of isolation areas in care homes. It's all about, kind of increased testing of residents and of staff. And sometimes perhaps we're forgetting about, quality of life in some of our care homes, because we want people at the end of their lives to be comfortable as possible. And if we're, some of the tests, for example, that we're asking care home residents to undergo are not actually nice tests for people to go through, quite distressing for residents. I understand why they need to happen. It is test. But I think sometimes as a society, whether it's the government or whether it's all of us, we've perhaps not been thinking about those in our care homes perhaps as much as we should have done.
Of course, Peterborough is one of the fastest growing economies, one of the fastest growing cities in the country before this outbreak. Where do you think this is going to leave us? Because despite the help that's out there for businesses and individuals and from the government, the economy in Peterborough is still going to suffer. And the council in particular are forecasting another £7 million shortfall. And they're in dire straits, aren't they?
Well, one of the most disappointing aspects of this whole lockdown and the coronavirus emergency, as well as obviously the very human cost that it's had, has been the impact, obviously, in our economy. I will just say this one thing. It's not all doom and gloom. Today I've been talking to the editor, the business editor of the Peterborough Telegraph, and he's telling me about how many more new jobs have been created in Peterborough and new factories and new businesses opening. So Peterborough's future is bright. Peterborough is one of the most, I believe, one of the most confident places we can be now for our future of our country. We've got so many advantages and we can make our future bright.
Nevertheless, you can't do that if your council's bankrupt because of COVID-19, can you? So should the government, look after all councils, whatever they're spending on this? Should any deficit be looked after so that people are not excessively harmed from lack of services going forward?
Well, Paul, one of the first things I did when I became the MP for Peterborough was actually to take the local authority, along with Shyless, via the MP for North West Cambs, to Westminster and to talk about how we might get a fairer funding settlement for our city. Because if I'm being completely honest, I don't think the funding formula really works for a city like Peterborough. It assumes we have the same sort of challenges as similar cities like Milton Keynes or towns like Milton Keynes and Northampton, etc., etc. But Peterborough is very different from these places because of our location, because we're being a magnet for migration, and sometimes perhaps the true population of our city is not reflected in the funding formula decisions. But government have to use some sort of formula. So it's up to me and up to other people to make sure that that formula reflects Peterborough. But the government have given extra money to Peterborough to get us through this COVID-19 emergency. I hope that money will have been spent wisely. I'm sure it will be. And once this is over, hopefully we've got the financial capacity to continue to make the improvements the city needs.
You mentioned you're positive about Peterborough's future, but none of us know what the future holds, does it? Or what it looks like, or what normal looks like, or when or if we could even have a pint in a pub again. So how can you be so positive?
Well, I think I'd be doing the city a great disservice if the MP was all doom and gloom. I'm relentlessly positive about my city and about the potential for my city. I think people from Peterborough we're a strange bunch, and we often are stubborn, we're often argumentative, we're often perhaps sometimes argue even with ourselves, but what we are is confident, skillful people. We're a working city, and I think the time for a city like Peterborough has come. Now we're leaving the European Union, we've got all the advantages of being on the A1, the main artery, going north. We've got we're only 38 minutes from London when the new kind of services there and the new trains are developed. We're close to the Cambridge in terms of some of the academic centres there. We've got a new university coming in. It's going to suit our working people in the city. We've got new companies coming here. But the biggest asset we've got is our people. And Paul, if there's one thing I can do with this job, I may only have it for 4 years. I hope I'll have it for 24 years, but I may only have it for 4 years, is to make the people of the city feel much, much more positive about the city that they live and they've grown up in. Because I'm relentlessly positive about it, and hopefully a positive mindset is contagious.
Paul, thank you very much. Really appreciate talking to us today. It's Paul Bristow, the MP for Peterborough, in a very positive mood, looking ahead to the future post-COVID-19. And we thank him for joining us on Lockdown Interviews today.